The early years a child experiences, the way you are raised determines how your personality develops as you grow up, how much love you received in childhood or didn't receive, how much attention you got when you were young or didn't get. These factors turn an 11-year-old girl into a killer who would manipulate anyone around her just to get her way. That's what this story is about. That really shocked me, and I think that because of this case, I will always see children in a different light. So let's learn a little more about today's case revolving around Mary Bell. Mary Flora Bell was born in 1957 in Northumberland, England. Mary's mum was Elizabeth Bell. Betty was a prostitute and she mostly couldn't stay at home due to traveling. She would leave her daughter Anna Mary at home with someone else for several days. This situation was so bad. This behavior of Betty continued in the future. She always neglected her children while traveling. When Mary was with her mom, Betty, who was a broken person, but her behavior and the traits that appeared in her partner were reflected in Mary. Betty neglected Mary during her childhood, and whenever Mary was with her mom, she would get hurt or she would fall while playing, and even then Betty neglected her. Betty did not care for or treat Mary. This made Mary's Aunt Isa feel that perhaps Betty was doing all this intentionally, so Mary would get severely injured or even die while playing. Aunt Isa also mentioned that in 1960, when Mary was just 3 years old, Betty did not look after or treat her. In anger, Betty pushed Mary out of the first floor window. Although she miraculously survived, she was left with significant injuries. Once, Betty gave Mary sleeping pills at a very young age, hoping she would never wake up again. It is also said that Betty once tried to sell Mary to a mentally unstable lady. It is also said that when Mary was just 5 years old, so from that time, Betty allowed some of her clients to sexually abuse Mary for just some money, which is just cruel. Her own mother made a literal child do all this. I cannot imagine how this must have affected her mental health at that point. But signs of Mary's mental state faltering started to show very early. Both at home and at school, Mary's behavior was very unpredictable. She would have sudden urges, a lot of mood swings, and even wet the bed until she was 9 years old, something that some people might say is common, but that's not the case here, okay? If a child wets the bed at such a late age, then that is a sign of not being stable. She often got into fights with other kids at school. And at a very young age, she even tried to choke children either in class or while playing. Because of this behavior, neither did kids approach Mary nor did anyone want to become her friend. But Mary had only one friend whose name was Norma Joyce Bell. Norma lived next to Mary, and she was the only one who talked to Mary. They both had the same last name, Bell, but they were not related. They were just neighbors. When Norma met Mary, she was not really aware of how Mary's temper was. But according to the statements, they both were really good friends. However, as Mary was growing up, her mood swings and actions were becoming more extreme. This extremity led to what happened with Mary in 1968. A 3-year-old child, dazed, covered in blood, and stumbling, was found by some people near Margaret Road. A man noticed him. He quickly took him to the hospital, and when he recovered, he told the police what had happened. That day, he was playing on the rooftop of a building with Mary Bell and Norma Bell. Suddenly, Mary got angry and pushed the child off from a height of 7 feet. Which is why he was so injured. He also said that allegedly before pushing him, Mary and Norma, they tried to strangle this child while playing in the sand. When the police questioned Norma and Mary that evening about whether they knew this child, both of them denied it. And they also denied ever going to that house. Mary chimed in, saying that they just found the boy in that condition there and they only pointed him towards the road. When asked about the choking incident, Mary denied it as well. But according to that boy, Mary had asked him at the time, "What happens if you choke someone to death?" After that, Mary put both her hands around his neck and started to squeeze slowly. His skin color began to change from normal to purple, and Norma shouted for her to stop, but she continued. Then another girl came to save the child, and Mary did the same thing with this second girl too. Another girl named Susan came along, and Mary did the same thing to her. The police warned local authorities about Mary's extreme behavior. The authorities had been warned about Mary's extreme behavior and they spread the news at school too. It was a very serious accusation against Mary and Norma. However, since both Mary and Norma were very young at the time, the police couldn't do much. The police just gave the girls a warning and told them to leave, but this was the first time the police couldn't do much. Mary's nature and her deeds were visible to people, but if the police had taken action at that time, so perhaps in the future, many lives could have been saved. When the three children were playing inside one of these abandoned houses, they saw Martin lying on his back. He had stress marks on his head, and foam was coming out of his mouth with a bit of blood in it. There wasn't any blood anywhere else, and there was nothing else around him. But other than that, there was no sign of violence. Seeing the sight, the three kids ran out and told the locals what had happened in that house, who then called an ambulance. And very soon, an ambulance arrived at the house. As soon as they came, the nurses tried to give Martin CPR, but by then, it was too late. And Martin was no longer alive. But the nurses who arrived noticed a bottle of aspirin near his body, so they thought maybe Martin had taken it and died. But later, when the report came out, they found out that there were no drugs in his body and Martin had died due to natural causes. But when the nurses were giving Martin CPR, two other girls came into the building, 10-year-old Mary Bell and 13-year-old Norma Bell. The nurses thought they were just kids playing there, so they shooed them away. And when Martin's aunt stepped out of her house, so Mary told them, like we, both the Bell kids, Norma and I, came here to play with Martin. You probably did not think about it at the time, because there was no blood. But later, Mary herself admitted that she was the one who killed Martin. The police deduced that perhaps since it was a construction site, Martin might have died due to a head injury or some other natural cause. The very next day, on the 26th of May, 1968, it was Mary's 11th birthday, and Mary and Norma celebrated Mary's birthday, broke into a nursery near Woodland Crescent, where they started vandalizing, tore books, took out tires, scribbled ink on the blackboard. They threw tables, and after causing so much destruction, the two ran away from there. As soon as the staff found out about this vandalism, they immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene. Among the damage, the police found 4 notes, one of which read, "I murder, so that I may come back." The second note said, "We did murder Martin Brown, you bastard." The third note simply said, "We murder, watch out, Fanny and Fessler." But the final note was the most complex. "You are a mess. Why? Because we murdered Martin for fun. Look at what your murderers have done for you, by Fanny and for you." These 4 notes portray that someone is murdering for their own sake, by Fanny and for their own sake. That someone was killing other children just for enjoyment, just for fun. But despite all this, the police dismissed the incident as just a prank by kids, saying it was their mischief, their prank. 2 days later, on the 29th of May, when Martin Brown's body was being placed in a coffin, both Mary and Norma went to Martin's house, pretending it was a prank by kids. They called Martin's mom and said they wanted to see Martin. June, Martin's mom, told them, "You can't see Martin now, dear." Thinking maybe these children don't know what actually happened to Martin. But upon hearing this, Mary said to June, "I know he's dead. I just want to see him in his coffin. If that did not give you chills, let me remind you that this was an 11-year-old girl, and Mary Bell didn't stop here. She was soon about to attack another innocent boy. He was playing outside his house with his brother and sister, and when Mary and Norma saw them, they came over as well. While playing, Brian, along with his dog, went to play with Mary and Norma. Their parents did not say anything, because children often went to play there, but as soon as evening came, and when Brian didn't return, his family started to worry. His entire family, along with the search party, went out to look for him. That same night, not long after, they found Brian's body between two large concrete blocks near their home playground. When the police arrived there, they noticed that after killing Brian, the murderer had tried to hide his body because it was covered with grass and weeds. But they did such a poor job that even the police were amazed. Brian's body had small bruises. He had scratches on his neck, and a broken pair of scissors was found near his body. Brian's hair was cut in a very strange way, and there was a pair of scissors near his genitalia. An M word mark was also found that had been cut with scissors. It seemed like someone was bullying Brian. And after seeing these bruises and scratches, the police determined that Brian had also been strangled and killed. The killer of Brian had closed his nostrils with one hand, and with the other hand, he strangled him. The police deduced another thing, which was that Brian's killer was a child, because firstly, an adult would use more force, and secondly, their handprints would be larger. Additionally, on Brian's clothes and shoes, a gray and maroon fiber was found. These fibers did not match anyone's clothing from Brian's house, so the police came. The police kept these fibers as evidence. After Brian Howe's body was found, a massive manhunt was launched. Numerous investigators began conducting investigations around Northumberland. They started questioning around 1,200 children, among whom were Mary and Norma, who were pointed out by all the children that these two girls were playing with Brian in the park that day. According to the police during the investigation day, Norma was the one talking more when they started asking questions. The police noticed that their stories about that day were different, which was not a good sign. So, yeah, Mary and Norma admitted that they both knew Brian and were playing with him that day. Mary told the police that she remembered seeing an 8-year-old local boy playing with Brian that afternoon, 31st of July, and that she had also seen him hitting the child. Furthermore, she stated that she also remembered that the boy had been covered in grass and weeds. It seemed like he had been rolling in a field and had a small pair of scissors with him. Then Mary slipped up, trying to make her story more convincing. She claimed she saw him attempting to cut a cat's tail with scissors, but something was off about them. Mary killed Brian, and she was the real murderer. Now the police had taken Mary and Norma into custody, not in the sense that they were put in jail, but they knew these two were involved in the murder of the children. And 2 days after this discovery, Norma's parents called the police station. They told the police that Norma might have known about Brian's death beforehand, and that she wanted to share this information. Norma knew about Brian's death and wanted to share this information. So James Dobson went to Norma's house, confronted her, warned her, and then asked her to tell him everything truthfully. Norma said that on that day, Mary was playing with someone. Then she took me along saying, "Let's go to the Tin Lizzie spot." Again, it's unclear what Tin Lizzie means, but I think it's a name. When Norma got there, she saw that Brian was lying dead. After that, Mary climbed over Brian's body and demonstrated to Norma how she had strangled him to death. Mary demonstrated to Norma how she strangled Brian and killed him. Then she told Norma, after killing Brian, she felt a strong sense of relief and satisfaction, and she was the one who carved the letter M on Brian's genitalia with a razor blade. Officer Dobson did not expect this from a child, but when he went back and told Mary all of this, first, she denied it and then told Dobson, "So you're accusing me, Brian's? If you're accusing me, then prove it." Mary knew about lawyers and the concept of legal defense. She was also aware she realized she was trapped and no one would help her. Her mom couldn't get her out of this mess, and her stepdad couldn't either. At that moment, Mary didn't know what else to do. So that evening, when she had no other option, she admitted everything to Dobson. It was indeed her who killed Brian. The forensic report also revealed that the fabric found near Brian's body belonged to Mary and Norma's clothes. And all of this meant that they have finally caught the killer. Brian Howie's body was being buried in the cemetery on the 7th of August, 1968. And that same evening, Dobson was about to arrest Mary. News of Brian's death had spread so much that around 200 people had gathered at the cemetery. But when Dobson arrived at the cemetery, they saw that they were about to arrest Mary. Officer Dobson saw Mary standing at the cemetery gate, rubbing her hands and laughing loudly at Brian's coffin. And he said to himself, "My God, I've got to bring her in, or else she'll do another one." Both girls were charged for Brian's death, to which Mary just said, "That's all right by me." But Norma, crying softly to herself, said, "I never loved you. I'll pay you back for this." See, in this case, it is clear that Norma was submissive. And because of being submissive, she agreed to everything Mary said, and Norma hadn't snitched on Mary for a very long time. But according to reports, Norma didn't commit any murders, nor did she touch the children. Mary carried out all the killings. Now you remember that I told you Mary's childhood story at the beginning. That was because I think her nature, her personality, was first due to her abuse, and secondly due to her mother's neglect. No child is inherently that cold to harm another child, but Mary's environment hardened her so much inside that she could harm another child. But Mary's environment hardened her so much from within that at a very young age, she took a wrong step, which led to Mary Bell being sentenced for the deaths of both boys. Norma Bell had all charges dropped against her when Mary herself said Norma hadn't done anything in this case. When Norma heard this in front of the jury, she clapped her hands in excitement while Mary was crying loudly behind her. And at that time in the court for Mary's mom and grandmother were also there, and with this, the case comes to an end. Before you go, I would just like to say that if you like watching true crime videos, then please subscribe to me and leave suggestions in the comments if you want me to cover any case. But I hope that all of you are healthy. I hope all of you are happy. Please keep your loved ones very close to you, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.